When I went bald, I heard my gold digger daughter-in-law joking with her friends. The shrew was already ugly. Now she looks big-headed too. Thank God I kept my husband's $128 million inheritance a secret. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought the sound of laughter could cut so deep until I heard it coming from my own kitchen, aimed directly at me. The wig felt heavier than usual that Tuesday evening as I sat in the living room, pretending to watch the news while my daughter-in-law Ainsley chatted on the phone with her friends. The chemotherapy had taken everything from me: my hair, my energy, my appetite. But I was trying so hard to hold on to what little dignity I had left. At 69, after losing my husband Judd just 2 years ago, this house felt more like a prison than the home where I'd raised my son Wesley. Oh my God, you should see her. Ainsley's voice carried easily through the thin walls. She was probably in the kitchen, twirling that blonde hair of hers around her finger like she always did when she was gossiping. The old bat looks absolutely ridiculous in that cheap wig. I swear the woman was already ugly before the cancer, but now she looks like a bald eagle trying to wear a Halloween costume. My hands trembled as I gripped the remote control. The news anchor's voice became background noise as my heart started pounding in my chest. I knew Ainsley had never liked me, but hearing her talk about my cancer, about my appearance during the worst time of my life, felt like a knife twisting in my stomach. I'm telling you, Sarah, living with her is like having a walking corpse in the house, she continued, her voice getting louder with excitement. Wesley keeps saying we need to be patient because she's sick, but honestly, how long are we supposed to pretend we care? The woman just sits there all day, looking miserable, making everyone else miserable too. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly turned up the volume on the television, trying to look absorbed in a story about local road construction. Wesley appeared in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes, his tie loosened around his neck. At 42, he looked so much like his father that sometimes it physically hurt to look at him. But where Judd had kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled, Wesley's eyes always seemed to be somewhere else. Always calculating, always tired. "Hey, Mom," he said without really looking at me. "How are you feeling today?" It was the same question he asked every day, delivered in the same flat tone that suggested he didn't really want an answer. Before I could respond, Ainsley's laughter echoed from the kitchen again, followed by more cruel words that I pretended not to hear. "She's telling her friends about her yoga class," Wesley said, noticing my glance toward the kitchen. "You know how women are when they get together." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Wesley had always been good at making excuses for Ainsley, even when her behavior was inexcusable. When she accidentally threw away my mother's china claiming she thought it was old junk. When she rearranged the living room and put all of Judd's photos in a box to help me move on. When she suggested I might be more comfortable in the guest room because the master bedroom was too big for just one person. "Wesley, can you come here for a second?" Ainsley called from the kitchen, her voice suddenly sweet as honey. "I need help reaching something." He disappeared without another word, leaving me alone with the television and the echo of her cruel words. I reached up and touched the wig, feeling the synthetic fibers that would never be as soft as my real hair had been. Judd used to love running his fingers through my hair, especially on Sunday mornings when we'd lie in bed reading the newspaper together. "Beautiful," he'd whisper, and I actually believed him. Now I felt like exactly what Ainsley had called me, a walking corpse. The murmur of their voices drifted back from the kitchen, too low for me to make out words, but the tone was intimate, conspiratorial. They were probably discussing me, planning something. They often did that, made decisions about my life, my health, my living situation without including me in the conversation. It had started small, with Ainsley suggesting I might want to take it easy and let her handle the grocery shopping. Then it was the cleaning, the cooking, the managing of my medications. Before I knew it, I'd become a guest in my own home. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time Wesley had defended me, had stood up to his wife when she was being cruel. I couldn't recall a single instance, not when she threw away my garden tools because they were cluttering up the garage, not when she invited her parents for Christmas without asking me first. Not when she started referring to the house as ours instead of Norma's. The cancer had made everything worse. What little independence I'd managed to maintain disappeared when the treatment started. Ainsley took control of everything with the efficiency of a general commanding troops, and Wesley seemed grateful that his wife was handling things so he didn't have to. They talked around me, over me, about me, but rarely to me. "Oh, that's hilarious," I heard Ainsley say, her voice carrying again. "You know what I told Wesley yesterday? I said we really need to start thinking about her future living arrangements. I mean, she's not getting any younger, and with the cancer. Well, let's just say we need to be realistic about what's coming." My blood ran cold. Living arrangements. They were talking about putting me in a home. I stood up slowly, my joints aching from sitting too long, and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had when Judd and I first moved here 30 years ago. The Millers still lived next door, though they were in their 80s now. The Johnsons' grandchildren rode bikes up and down the street, just like their children had done a generation ago. This was my life, my world, my home. But apparently, according to my daughter-in-law, it was time for me to leave it. I heard Wesley's low voice respond to something Ainsley had said, but I couldn't make out his words. Whatever he was saying, it made her laugh again, that sharp, satisfied laugh that told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay. Turning away from the window, I caught my reflection in the dark glass. Ainsley was right about one thing. I did look terrible. The wig sat awkwardly on my head, never quite feeling natural no matter how I adjusted it. My skin was pale and thin from the treatments, and I'd lost so much weight that my clothes hung loose on my frame. I looked old, sick, defeated. But as I stared at that reflection, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was hurt, or maybe it was just exhaustion from trying so hard to be grateful for their kindness, when what I really felt was completely unwanted. I thought about Judd, about what he would say if he could see how they were treating me. He'd always been protective, sometimes too protective, but he would never have tolerated anyone speaking about me the way Ainsley did. He would have put a stop to it immediately. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, the guest room now, according to Ainsley's redecorating, I realized that for the first time since Judd's death, I was truly, completely alone. And maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The next morning brought no relief from the previous evening's revelation. I woke up to the sound of Ainsley's voice drifting up from downstairs, bright and cheerful as she talked to someone on the phone, probably making more plans for my life without consulting me. I lay in the narrow guest bed, staring at the ceiling that used to be my sewing room, and tried to remember when everything had changed. When had I become the burden instead of the mother? When had my own son stopped seeing me as a person worth defending? Getting dressed took longer these days. The wig required careful positioning, and my hands shook slightly as I applied the makeup that was supposed to give me some color, but mostly just made me look like I was playing dress-up. I could hear Ainsley moving around downstairs, probably making her protein smoothie and checking her phone for messages from her personal trainer. She was always so focused on maintaining her appearance, so conscious of how she looked to the world. When I finally made it to the kitchen, she was sitting at the breakfast bar with her laptop open, typing rapidly. She looked up when I entered, and for just a moment, I saw something flash across her face. Not quite guilt, but close enough to make her voice overly bright when she spoke. "Good morning, Norma. How are you feeling today? You look better." The lie hung in the air between us. We both knew I looked terrible, and her attempt at kindness only made it worse. "I'm fine," I replied, moving toward the coffee maker, but Ainsley was already up, blocking my path with what she probably thought was helpfulness. "Oh, let me get that for you. You shouldn't be lifting heavy things." She poured coffee into a mug. Not one of my good china cups, but a plain ceramic one that looked like it came from a gas station. "I was just talking to my friend Michelle about assisted living facilities. Have you ever thought about what you might want when you're ready to make that transition?" The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Transition? Well, she settled back onto her stool, her voice taking on that patient tone people use with children or invalids. "We all have to think about these things eventually. especially after serious health issues. I was telling Wesley last night that we really should start exploring options, just to be prepared. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to steady myself. I'm not ready for a nursing home, Ainsley. Oh, not a nursing home. She laughed as if the idea was ridiculous. I'm talking about those lovely assisted living communities. They're like apartments, but with help when you need it. Meals provided, activities, people your own age to socialize with. It might be exactly what you need right now. What I needed was to be treated with respect in my own home, but I didn't say that. Instead, I took another sip of coffee and watched her face. She was excited about this idea, I could tell. Her eyes were bright, and she kept glancing at her laptop screen as if she'd already been researching places. I think it's wonderful that you're thinking ahead, I said carefully. But I'm not ready to make any big decisions right now. Her smile tightened just slightly. Of course not. I just think it's good to have information, don't you? Wesley worries about you being alone during the day when we're both at work. What if something happened? What if you fell or had a reaction to your medication? It was a reasonable concern, presented in a reasonable way, but I could hear the underlying message. I was becoming a liability, a responsibility they didn't want to carry. The solution was to move me somewhere else where I'd be someone else's problem. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I've been managing just fine. Have you, though? The question came out sharper than she'd probably intended. She caught herself and softened her tone. I mean, I've noticed you've been having some trouble with things lately. Yesterday you left the stove on after making tea. Last week you forgot to take your evening medication. These things happen, especially when someone's been through what you've been through. But she was right, and that made it worse. The treatments had affected my memory, my concentration. There had been small incidents, minor oversights that I'd hoped no one had noticed. But apparently Ainsley had been keeping track, building a case. Maybe we could start with some in-home help, I suggested. Someone to come in a few hours a week. That's so expensive, though, she said quickly. And strangers in the house. I'd worry about security, wouldn't you? At least in an assisted living facility, everything's supervised and safe. I set down my coffee cup and looked at her directly. She was 28 years old, with perfect blonde hair and a body that she maintained with expensive gym memberships and weekly spa treatments. She wore designer clothes and carried purses that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She'd never worked a day in her life before marrying Wesley, and even now her job at an art gallery was more hobby than necessity. Ainsley, I said slowly, I know you mean well, but this is my home. Judd and I bought this house together, raised Wesley here. I'm not ready to leave. Something flickered in her eyes then, something cold. But is it really fair to Wesley? He's working so hard to support both of us, and then he comes home worried sick about whether you're okay. It's affecting his health, his job performance. I just think if you really love him, you'd want what's best for him. The manipulation was so smooth, so expertly delivered, that I almost admired it. She'd turned my desire to stay in my own home into a selfish act that was hurting my son. Wesley, who made 6 figures at his corporate job and could easily afford to hire help if he was truly concerned about my welfare. Where is Wesley this morning? I asked. He had an early meeting. But we talked about this last night, and he agrees that we need to start making plans. He's just too sweet to bring it up with you directly. You know how he hates to upset people. Sweet. That was one word for it. Another word might be cowardly. I heard a car door slam outside and looked through the window to see Wesley getting out of his sedan. He must have forgotten something. As he walked up the path to the front door, I watched Ainsley's posture change subtly. Her shoulders straightened, her expression became more animated, more concerned. Morning again, Wesley said as he came into the kitchen, loosening his tie. I forgot my presentation folder. He kissed Ainsley on the cheek and nodded at me. How are you feeling, Mom? Ainsley was just telling me about some assisted living facilities she's been researching, I said, watching his face carefully. He shot a quick glance at his wife, and I saw something pass between them. They'd definitely discussed this, probably in detail. Well, he said slowly, it's not a bad idea to have information, just in case. Just in case of what? Another look between them. Wesley cleared his throat. You know, Mom, if your health gets worse, or if you decide you want more social interaction, some of those places are really nice. Like resort communities, with medical staff on site, Ainsley added helpfully, and activities programs. You might actually enjoy it. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised from a baby, and tried to find some trace of the boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared, who cried when he had to leave me on his first day of school. That boy had loved me unconditionally. This man was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. I'm not ready, I repeated firmly. When I am, I'll let you know. Wesley's jaw tightened slightly. Mom, we're just trying to help. Ainsley's put a lot of time into researching this, and I didn't ask her to. The words came out harder than I'd intended, and the kitchen fell silent. Ainsley's eyes widened with what looked like hurt, but I caught the flash of anger underneath. I was trying to be helpful, she said softly. I thought you'd appreciate someone caring enough to look into your options. I was the ungrateful one, the difficult mother-in-law who couldn't appreciate her daughter-in-law's thoughtfulness. The game was rigged, and I was tired of playing. I need to get going, Wesley said, grabbing his folder from the counter. We'll talk about this later, okay? He kissed Ainsley goodbye and squeezed my shoulder briefly before heading out. The gesture might have been comforting if it hadn't felt so much like a dismissal. Ainsley and I sat in silence for a few moments after his car pulled away. Then she closed her laptop and stood up, smoothing down her designer workout clothes. I know change is scary, she said in that patient voice again, but sometimes it's exactly what we need. I'm going to keep looking at places, just so we have options when you're ready to think about it. She left the kitchen, and I heard her go upstairs to their bedroom. A few minutes later, she came back down in full workout gear and grabbed her gym bag. I'll be back around noon, she called out. Try to take it easy today, okay? Then she was gone, and I was alone in the house that felt less like home every day. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the conversation, about the way they'd tag-teamed me, about how easily they'd made me feel selfish for wanting to stay in my own home. They were planning my life around their convenience, and they were doing it with smiles and concern and the pretense that they were helping me. But as I sat there, something else occurred to me. Something they didn't know, something no one knew except me. I wasn't nearly as helpless as they thought I was. That afternoon, while Ainsley was at her yoga class and Wesley was still at work, I did something I hadn't done in months. I climbed the stairs to the attic. The pull-down ladder creaked under my weight, but I managed it. The attic was dusty and warm, filled with boxes of Christmas decorations, old furniture, and memories I'd been avoiding since Judd's death. But I wasn't looking for memories today. I was looking for something much more practical. In the far corner, behind a stack of boxes labeled Wesley's school papers, in my own handwriting from decades ago, I found what I was searching for. A small metal lockbox that looked unremarkable, the kind you might use for important documents or a few pieces of jewelry. Ainsley had probably seen it during one of her organizing sessions and dismissed it as just another piece of old junk. She had no idea what was inside. My hands trembled slightly as I carried the box back down to my bedroom and closed the door. I hadn't opened it since the day after Judd's funeral, when grief and shock had made everything feel surreal and distant. Now, sitting on the edge of the narrow guest bed, I turned the small key that I kept hidden in my jewelry box. Inside were documents that would change everything if Wesley and Ainsley ever discovered them. Bank statements, investment portfolios, account numbers, and passwords. All of it carefully organized in Judd's meticulous handwriting, along with a letter addressed to me in his familiar script. I picked up the letter with shaking hands. I'd read it once before, 2 years ago, but the words had barely registered through my grief. Now they felt like a lifeline. My dearest Norma, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling lost and alone. I wish I could be there to hold you through this, but since I can't, I'm leaving you something else instead. Freedom. I had to stop reading for a moment to wipe my eyes. Even in death, Judd was still trying to take care of me. I never told you about the investments because I didn't want you to worry about money or change how you lived your life. But over the years, through some careful planning and a few lucky breaks, I managed to put aside more than we ever needed. Much more. The letter went on to detail accounts I'd never known existed, investment portfolios that had been growing quietly for decades, real estate holdings in other states, business partnerships that continued to generate income even after his death. All of it hidden from everyone, including Wesley, including the lawyers who'd handled the official estate, the house, the cars, the checking account. All of that was just what I wanted people to see. He'd written, "This is what I wanted you to have. Complete financial independence, so you'll never have to depend on anyone who doesn't truly love and respect you." The numbers were staggering. $128 million, split across multiple accounts, invested in stable funds, and managed by a discreet private banking firm in another state. Enough money to buy a mansion, travel the world, hire a full staff of caregivers, or simply live comfortably for the rest of my life without ever having to ask anyone for anything. And Wesley and Ainsley had no idea it existed. I leaned back against the pillows, the letter still in my hands, and thought about this morning's conversation, about Ainsley's research into assisted living facilities, about Wesley's concerned looks and his willingness to go along with his wife's plans, about how they'd made me feel like a burden, like someone whose wishes didn't matter. They thought I was dependent on them. They thought I had nowhere else to go. They were wrong. The letter continued. "I know our son, and I love him, but I also know his weaknesses. Wesley has always been easily influenced by people who are more decisive than he is. If he marries the wrong woman, if he falls in with the wrong crowd, if he starts making decisions based on what's easy rather than what's right, I don't want you to suffer for it." Judd had been more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. He'd seen something in Wesley that I'd refused to acknowledge, a weakness of character that made him susceptible to manipulation. And when Ainsley came along with her beauty and her confidence and her willingness to make all the decisions, Wesley had gladly handed over control. "The money is yours," the letter concluded. "Use it however you see fit. Travel, donate to charity, buy yourself everything you've ever wanted, or just keep it as security. But whatever you do, don't let anyone make you feel powerless. You're not a burden, Norma. You're not dependent. You're not at anyone's mercy. You're free." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. Then I picked up one of the bank statements and stared at the balance. Even after 2 years of growth, the number seemed impossible. I was one of the wealthiest women in the state, and I was sitting in a guest room wearing a wig and being told by my daughter-in-law that I needed to consider my living arrangements. The irony was almost funny. I heard a car in the driveway and quickly locked the box, hiding it in the back of my closet behind some old coats. A few minutes later, Ainsley's voice carried up the stairs. "Norma, I'm back. I picked up some groceries." I went downstairs to find her unpacking organic vegetables and expensive yogurt in the kitchen. She looked glowing and energetic from her workout, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. "How was your afternoon?" she asked, not really looking at me as she organized the refrigerator. "I hope you got some rest." "It was fine," I said. "Quiet." "Good. You need your rest." She closed the refrigerator and turned to face me with that bright smile. "Oh, I had the most wonderful conversation with Michelle at yoga. Her mother-in-law just moved into this amazing place called Sunset Manor. It's like a resort. They have a pool, a library, organized activities, even a beauty salon on site. And the best part is, it's only about 20 minutes away, so we could visit all the time." I nodded politely while she talked, but inside I was calculating. 20 minutes away. Close enough for them to feel like they were being dutiful children, far enough away that they wouldn't have to deal with me on a daily basis. Perfect for their needs. "I was thinking," she continued, "maybe we could drive by there this weekend, just to look at the grounds. You don't have to commit to anything, but it might help to see what these places actually look like." "That's thoughtful of you," I said carefully, "but I'm still not ready to make any changes." Her smile flickered slightly. "I know, but sometimes seeing our options can help us feel more comfortable with the idea of change. And honestly, Norma, I think you might really enjoy having people around who understand what you're going through. Other women who've dealt with health issues, who know what it's like to lose a spouse. The manipulation was subtle but clear. I was isolated, damaged, in need of help that she and Wesley couldn't provide. The solution was to put me somewhere with my own kind, other sick, elderly, displaced women. "I'll think about it," I said. "Wonderful." She clapped her hands together. "I'll make some calls and see if we can schedule a tour. Oh, and I wanted to ask you about something else. Wesley and I have been talking about redoing the master bathroom. It's so outdated, and since you're not using it anymore anyway." She kept talking, making plans for renovations to my house, improvements that would benefit her and Wesley. As she spoke, I found myself calculating again. The bathroom renovation she was describing would probably cost $20,000. I could pay for it with the interest from just one of my accounts and not even notice the expense. But I wasn't going to tell her that. Instead, I listened to her plans and nodded at appropriate intervals while privately marveling at the position I found myself in. I was probably the wealthiest person in this entire neighborhood, possibly in the entire city, and my daughter-in-law was standing in my kitchen explaining why I needed to be moved to an assisted living facility for my own good. "So, what do you think?" she asked, finally winding down her bathroom renovation monologue. "It sounds lovely," I said. "I'm sure you and Wesley will be very happy with whatever you decide." She beamed at me, apparently interpreting my response as enthusiasm for her plans. "I'm so glad you're being so positive about all of this. Change can be hard, but sometimes it's exactly what we need to move forward with our lives." After she went upstairs to shower, I sat in the kitchen thinking about Judd's letter, about the secret he'd kept, about the freedom he'd tried to give me. He'd known this day would come, the day when I'd have to choose between accepting their vision of my life or creating my own. The question was, what was I going to do with that freedom? As I heard the shower running upstairs, I allowed myself to smile for the first time in weeks. Ainsley and Wesley thought they held all the cards, thought they were managing a helpless old woman who had no choices. They had no idea what game they were actually playing. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning that started like any other, but ended with me finally understanding exactly where I stood in my own family. I'd been feeling stronger lately, though I kept that to myself. The last round of chemotherapy was behind me, and while I was still wearing the wig and moving carefully, I had more energy than I'd had in months. I'd even started taking small walks around the neighborhood in the early mornings, when Ainsley was still asleep and Wesley had already left for work. That morning, I came back from my walk to find Ainsley in the living room with 2 strangers, a middle-aged woman in a business suit and a younger man with a clipboard. They were standing near the mantelpiece, and the woman was examining one of my mother's china figurines with obvious interest. "Oh, there you are," Ainsley said when she saw me. Her voice had that overly bright quality that meant she was nervous about something. "Norma, I'd like you to meet Janet from Prestige Estate Sales and her assistant Mark. I asked them to come take a look at some of your collectibles." My blood ran cold. "My collectibles?" Janet smiled at me with professional sympathy. "Mrs. Holloway." Ainsley explained that you're planning to downsize soon, and you're concerned about what to do with some of your more valuable pieces. I specialize in helping families transition these kinds of items. You have some lovely things here. I looked around my living room with new eyes. They were evaluating my possessions, pricing them, deciding what was worth selling. The china cabinet that had belonged to my grandmother, the antique clock that Judd had given me for our 20th anniversary, the Persian rug we'd bought on our honeymoon. "I haven't decided to sell anything," I said carefully. Ainsley's laugh sounded forced. "Well, of course not yet. This is just an evaluation. Janet's giving us an idea of what things might be worth, for insurance purposes. And if you do decide to move to a smaller place, it's good to know what you have." The lie was smooth and well-practiced. I wondered how long she'd been planning this, how many phone calls she'd made while I was out walking or resting. "Your Hummel collection alone is worth quite a bit," Janet was saying, making notes on her clipboard. "And this china set, is it complete? Service for 12? 8, I said quietly. It was my mother's. Still very valuable, probably $1,500 to $2,000 for the set. depending on condition. I watched Ainsley's eyes light up at the numbers. She was already spending the money in her head, probably planning what she'd do with the space once my clutter was gone. Janet was also telling me about their full-service option, Ainsley said. They can handle everything. Packing, selling, even cleaning the house afterward. Isn't that wonderful? It would take all the stress off of you when you're ready to make your move. When? Not if. The decision had already been made, apparently. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, my voice getting stronger. I'm not planning to move anywhere. Janet looked confused, glancing between Ainsley and me. Oh, I'm sorry. Ainsley said you were definitely transitioning to assisted living and needed to liquidate your household goods. The word liquidate hit me like a slap. My entire life reduced to household goods to be liquidated. Perhaps I should come back another time, Janet said diplomatically, sensing the tension in the room. That might be best, I said firmly. After Janet and Mark left, Ainsley turned to me with that patient expression I'd come to hate. Norma, I know that was overwhelming, but I really think having the information will help you feel more in control when you're ready to make decisions. I never asked you to call them. I know, but someone has to think practically about these things. You can't take everything with you to a smaller place, and it's better to have a plan than to try to figure it out at the last minute. I stared at her, this beautiful young woman who'd moved into my house and was systematically dismantling my life while pretending to help me. What gave you the impression that I was definitely moving? Her mask slipped slightly. Wesley and I both think it would be best. You're not getting any younger, and with your health issues. My health is improving. Is it, though? She tilted her head with fake concern. Because yesterday, you seemed confused about what day it was, and last week you forgot to turn off the iron. These things add up, you know. We're worried about your safety. I had been confused about the day. It was Saturday, but I'd thought it was Sunday for some reason, and I had left the iron on, though it had an automatic shutoff that I knew would protect the house. But she was keeping track of every small mistake, building a case for my incompetence. I'm managing fine, I said. Are you, though? Really? Her voice was getting sharper now that the strangers were gone. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're in denial about your limitations. And that's dangerous. Not just for you, but for all of us living in this house. The threat was subtle, but clear. If I didn't agree to leave voluntarily, they'd find a way to make me leave. This is my house, I said quietly. Yes. And we want you to get the full value out of it when you sell. That's why I'm trying to help you organize everything now, while we can take our time and make good decisions. Sell. She was talking about me selling my house, as if it were a foregone conclusion. That afternoon, after Ainsley left to meet friends for lunch, I called the private banking firm that managed my accounts. I'd memorized the number from Judd's papers but had never used it. The woman who answered was professional and discreet. Mrs. Holloway, how can I help you today? I'd like to make some arrangements, I said. I think it's time I became more actively involved in managing my assets. 2 hours later, I'd set up a private consultation for the following week. I'd also inquired about real estate services, financial planning, and legal assistance. If Ainsley wanted to make plans for my future, I'd make some plans of my own. That evening, Wesley came home to find me in the kitchen making dinner, something I hadn't done in weeks. I'd found the energy to cook his favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables, the way I used to make it when he was growing up. This smells amazing, Mom, he said, loosening his tie. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. It's no trouble, I said. I wanted to. Ainsley appeared a few minutes later, fresh from her afternoon out. She looked surprised to see me at the stove, then pleased in a way that made me suspicious. How wonderful! You're feeling so much better. I was just telling my friend Lisa that you've been having more good days lately. We sat down to dinner, and for a few minutes, it almost felt like a normal family meal. Wesley complimented the food, Ainsley talked about her day, and I listened to them discuss their plans for the weekend. But underneath the pleasant conversation, I could feel the undercurrent of their assumptions about my future. Mom, Wesley said as we were finishing dessert, Ainsley told me about the estate sale people coming by today. I hope that wasn't too overwhelming. I set down my fork and looked at him directly. Wesley, are you under the impression that I've agreed to move somewhere? He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Well, not exactly agreed, but we've been talking about it, and it seems like the logical next step. Logical for whom? Ainsley jumped in before he could answer. For everyone, really. You'd have medical care available, social activities, no worries about maintaining a house or cooking or cleaning. And Wesley and I wouldn't have to worry about you being alone all day. What if I hired some help instead? Someone to come in a few hours a day. They exchanged one of their looks. That's expensive, Wesley said. And you'd still be basically alone most of the time. How expensive? I asked. Another look between them. They didn't think I could afford it, didn't think I had any real options except to go along with their plans. It doesn't matter, Ainsley said firmly. The point is, assisted living would be so much better for you. More comprehensive care, built-in social opportunities, and peace of mind for all of us. I nodded thoughtfully. I understand your concerns, but I need you both to understand something too. This is my life, and I'll make my own decisions about how to live it. Wesley's jaw tightened. Mom, we're just trying to help. You're not thinking clearly about what's practical. I'm thinking more clearly than you know. After dinner, I helped clean up and then excused myself to my room. I could hear them talking in low voices in the kitchen, probably discussing my stubbornness and how to overcome it. Sitting on my bed with Judd's letter in my hands, I made my decision. It was time to show them exactly how clearly I could think. The next morning, while they were both out, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a real estate agent in Scottsdale, Arizona, a city I'd always wanted to visit. The second was to a moving company that specialized in discreet, high-end relocations. The third was to a lawyer who specialized in estate planning and family law. By the time Ainsley returned from her morning yoga class, I had appointments set up and plans in motion. It was time to take control of my own life. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of secret phone calls and carefully planned meetings. While Ainsley researched assisted living facilities and Wesley worked long hours to provide for the family, I was orchestrating the most liberating period of my life. My first meeting with Margaret Chen, the private banker, took place in downtown Phoenix, while Ainsley thought I was at a doctor's appointment. Margaret was a sophisticated woman in her 50s who treated me with the respect and attention that someone with my financial resources deserved. For the first time in months, I felt like my opinions mattered. Mrs. Holloway, she said, reviewing the portfolio Judd had left me, you have an impressive array of assets. Your late husband was quite astute in his investments. What are your goals for these funds? Independence, I said without hesitation. Complete independence. She smiled. I think we can arrange that. By the end of our meeting, I had authorized the purchase of a beautiful condominium in a luxury retirement community in Scottsdale. Not the kind of assisted living facility Ainsley had been researching, but an active adult community where I could live completely independently while having access to amenities and social opportunities. The unit I'd chosen had 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a balcony overlooking the golf course, and cost more than most people's houses. I paid cash. The moving company consultation happened the following week while Ainsley was at her book club. The coordinator, a discreet woman named Patricia, walked through my house with me, making notes about what I wanted to take and what I was leaving behind. The china, the antiques, the family photos, definitely, I told her. Most of the furniture can stay. I'm buying new pieces for the new place. And the timeline? Patricia asked. 2 weeks from today. She raised an eyebrow. That's quite quick for a move of this scope. I've waited long enough to start my new life. The hardest part was keeping the secret. Every day I watched Wesley and Ainsley make plans for my future. Their future, really. While I quietly prepared to disappear from their control entirely, Ainsley showed me brochures for Sunset Manor, the facility she'd decided was perfect for me. Wesley made concerned comments about my episodes of forgetfulness, building the case for why I needed professional care. If they had paid attention, they might have noticed that my episodes were becoming less frequent, that I was moving with more energy, that I seemed less defeated than I had in months, but they were so focused on their narrative of my decline that they missed the signs of my recovery. 3 days before my planned departure, Ainsley presented me with what she clearly thought was wonderful news. I have amazing information, she announced. bouncing into the kitchen where I was having my morning coffee. I spoke with the director at Sunset Manor yesterday and they have an opening. A lovely corner unit with a garden view. It's available immediately. Immediately? I repeated. Well, within the week. I know it seems fast, but good spots don't stay available long, and this one is perfect for you. I took the liberty of putting down a small deposit to hold it. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. She'd put down a deposit without asking me, without even pretending to care about my opinion. You put down a deposit, just to hold the spot, fully refundable if you decide against it, but I thought you'd want me to secure it. The waiting list for units like this is months long. I sipped my coffee, buying myself time to think. In 3 days, I would be gone. All I had to do was continue the charade for 72 more hours. When would I need to move in? I asked. This weekend would be ideal. That way Wesley can help with the transition, and we can get you settled before he has to go back to work on Monday. This weekend. The same weekend I was planning to disappear to Arizona. That does seem fast, I said carefully. I know, but sometimes these opportunities come up and you have to grab them. I've already started packing some of your things, just the essentials, so the transition will be easier. My blood ran cold. You've been packing my things? Just some clothes and personal items. I didn't want you to have to worry about it. Everything's very organized, and I was careful with your delicate items. I excused myself and went upstairs to find that Ainsley had indeed been through my belongings. My closet was half empty with clothes neatly folded in boxes. My dresser drawers had been reorganized. She'd even packed some of my jewelry, though thankfully she'd missed the small box where I kept the key to Judd's lockbox. The violation was complete. She wasn't just planning my future anymore. She was actively dismantling my present. That evening, Wesley came home with paperwork from Sunset Manor. I stopped by today during lunch, he said, spreading the forms out on the dining room table. It really is a nice place, Mom. Clean, friendly staff, good security. I think you'll be happy there. I looked at the admission forms, the medical questionnaires, the financial disclosure statements. They wanted to know about my income, my assets, my insurance coverage. Standard procedure for a facility that cost $8,000 a month. This is expensive, I said. We've worked it out, Wesley said. Your Social Security and Dad's pension will cover most of it, and Ainsley and I can help with the difference. We want you to have the best care available. They thought my total monthly income was about $3,000. They had no idea that the interest from my investments was more than 10 times that amount. You'd do that for me? I asked. Of course, Ainsley said, squeezing my hand. We're family. We take care of each other. Family? The word felt bitter in my mouth. I signed the papers. The next morning, while they were both out, I made my final preparations. I called Patricia to confirm the moving schedule. I transferred additional funds to my new bank account in Arizona. I arranged for my mail to be forwarded to a private mailbox service. By noon, everything was in place. That afternoon, I sat Ainsley and Wesley down in the living room. I've been thinking about what you said, I began. About Sunset Manor, about making a fresh start. They both leaned forward, eager to hear my capitulation. You're right, I continued. It's time for me to make a change. Time for me to stop being a burden on your lives. Mom, you're not a burden, Wesley started, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. I've decided that you're right about everything. I need more care than you can provide. I need to be around people my own age, in a place designed for my needs. Ainsley's face lit up with triumph. Oh, Norma, I'm so glad you're being open to this. I think you're going to love it at Sunset Manor. Actually, I said calmly, I won't be going to Sunset Manor. They both froze. I've made other arrangements. I'm moving to Arizona, to a lovely retirement community in Scottsdale. I leave on Saturday. The silence that followed was deafening. Arizona? Wesley finally managed. Mom, that's across the country. It's exactly what I need, I said. Sunshine, dry air, a fresh start somewhere that no one knows me as the sick old woman I've been these past 2 years. But we've already put down deposits, Ainsley sputtered. We've made arrangements. You made arrangements, I corrected, without asking me. Just like you called the estate sale people without asking me. Just like you've been packing my belongings without asking me. Wesley's face was flushed. Mom, this is crazy. You can't just move across the country by yourself. Who's going to take care of you? I'm going to take care of myself. With what money? Ainsley demanded, her mask finally slipping completely. You can't afford a place in Arizona. I smiled at her. Actually, I can. And then I told them about Judd's real estate holdings in Phoenix. Not about the full extent of my inheritance. They didn't deserve to know that. But enough to explain how I could afford to relocate. I told them about the small apartment I'd purchased, about the modest nest egg I'd discovered among Judd's papers. They were stunned into silence. The movers come tomorrow, I said. I'll be taking my personal belongings, the china, some furniture. Everything else stays with the house. You can't sell the house, Wesley said frantically. This is our home. I'm not selling it, I said calmly. I'm giving it to you. Consider it an early inheritance. The relief on their faces was almost comical. They'd get the house, they'd be rid of me, and they wouldn't have to pay for assisted living. From their perspective, this was the perfect solution. But Arizona is so far, Wesley said, making one last attempt at seeming like a caring son. How will we visit? I'm sure you'll manage, I said, if you want to. As I went upstairs to finish my packing, I could hear them talking in excited whispers. They were probably already planning how they'd redecorate, how they'd use the space, how much money they'd save. That night, I lay in the guest bed for the last time, listening to the sounds of the house I'd lived in for 30 years. Tomorrow, I would wake up and begin the most exciting chapter of my life. For the first time since Judd's death, I fell asleep smiling. 6 months later, I stood on my balcony in Scottsdale, watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and crimson. My hair had grown back, silver and soft, and I'd stopped wearing the wig weeks ago. I felt more like myself than I had in years. The retirement community had exceeded even my highest expectations. Desert Springs wasn't an assisted living facility. It was a luxury resort that happened to be populated entirely by active adults over 55. My condominium had 2 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a view that never failed to take my breath away. The community offered everything from golf lessons to art classes to wine tastings, and I'd thrown myself into activities with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including myself. I'd made friends, real friends, not people who tolerated me out of obligation. Eleanor from next door had become my closest companion, a widow in her 70s who'd moved here from Chicago after her children started making noises about her being too isolated. Like me, she'd discovered that sometimes the best chapters of your life don't begin until you stop letting other people write them for you. You look happy, said a voice behind me. I turned to find Dr. Martinez, my neighbor from across the hall and my occasional dinner companion. He was a retired physician who'd lost his wife 3 years ago and understood what it meant to rebuild a life from scratch. I am happy, I said, and meant it completely. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last of the daylight fade. These moments of simple contentment had become precious to me. For so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to exist without constantly worrying about someone else's approval or managing someone else's emotions. Any word from your family? Dr. Martinez asked gently. I smiled. Wesley calls every few weeks. Very dutiful phone calls where he asks about my health and tells me about work. Ainsley usually gets on for a minute or two to say hello. What I didn't tell him was how those conversations felt. Polite, distant, careful. Wesley still couldn't quite believe I'd managed to relocate successfully without his help. Ainsley was clearly annoyed that I hadn't fallen on my face and come crawling back, needing rescue. They'd expected me to fail, to prove that their concerns about my independence had been justified. Instead, I'd thrived. In the past 6 months, I'd taken a pottery class and discovered I had a talent for it. I'd joined a book club that actually read challenging literature instead of just gossiping over coffee. I'd started volunteering at a local animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was constantly managing other people's needs. Most importantly, I'd started using Judd's money the way he'd intended, to give me freedom and choices. I'd hired a part-time housekeeper, not because I needed the help, but because I could afford it and it freed up my time for things I enjoyed more than cleaning. I'd bought a beautiful new car, a silver SUV that made me feel confident and capable on the road. I'd even taken a trip to Europe, something Judd and I had always planned to do someday. Someday had turned out to be now, and it had been everything I'd hoped it would be. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Wesley's name appeared on the screen. I should take this, I told Dr. Martinez. Family. He nodded and went back to his own condo, giving me privacy for the call. Hi, Wesley. Hey, Mom. How are you feeling? The same question, asked in the same careful tone, as if he were still waiting for me to admit I'd made a mistake. I'm wonderful. How are you and Ainsley? We're good. Busy. Ainsley's been redecorating the master bathroom. You remember the project she mentioned before you moved? I remembered. The $20,000 renovation that they couldn't afford but felt entitled to because they thought I was too poor and sick to have opinions about my own house. That's nice. I hope she's happy with it. She is. She posted some pictures on social media if you want to see them. I didn't, but I made appropriate noises. Mom, I wanted to ask you something. Wesley continued, his tone shifting slightly. Are you really okay out there? Financially, I mean? There it was. The real reason for the call. I'm fine, Wesley. More than fine. It's just, some of the neighbors mentioned that you have a very nice place and you've been traveling, and I know Dad didn't leave that much money. I smiled. Someone had been checking up on me, probably trying to figure out how I was affording my lifestyle. The truth was starting to worry them. Your father was more careful with money than either of us realized, I said, which was technically true. How much more careful? The question hung in the air between us. I could hear the greed in it, the calculation. Even now, even after they'd gotten the house and gotten rid of me, they were wondering if there was more they should have gotten. Enough for me to live comfortably, I said. You don't need to worry about me. I'm not worried about you exactly. I just want to make sure you're not spending money you can't afford to spend. Sometimes when people are on their own for the first time, they make poor financial decisions. The condescension in his voice made my jaw clench. Even now, he couldn't quite accept that I was capable of managing my own life. Wesley, I said calmly, I'm 69 years old. I managed a household budget for over 40 years, raised you, and helped your father build a successful life. I think I can handle my own finances. Of course, Mom, I didn't mean. I just care about you. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony thinking about that conversation. Wesley did care about me in his way. But his care came with conditions, with the expectation that I would remain the manageable, grateful mother who deferred to his judgment and accepted his version of what was best for me. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. When I opened it, I found Eleanor holding a bottle of wine and grinning. Margaret Chen called, she said, walking past me into my living room. The investment portfolio hit another milestone. Time to celebrate. Eleanor was the only person who knew about my real financial situation. She'd introduced me to Margaret, had been my companion on the European trip, and had become the sister I'd never had. She understood what it meant to be underestimated by your own family. How much this time? I asked, getting glasses from the kitchen. $8.2 million in growth this year alone. Judd really knew what he was doing. I poured the wine and we settled on my couch, looking out at the twinkling lights of the desert community. Do you ever think about telling Wesley? Eleanor asked. Sometimes, but then I remember how they treated me when they thought I was helpless, and I realize they don't deserve to know. What will you do with it all? Yeah, I'd been thinking about that a lot lately. The money was more than I could ever spend, even if I lived another 30 years in luxury. I'm setting up a foundation, I said, for women who need help starting over after major life changes. Divorce, widowhood, illness, situations where they need resources to rebuild. Eleanor raised her glass. Judd would be proud. I think he would. He always said money was only worth something if it gave you freedom to live the life you wanted. As we sat there sipping wine and planning my foundation, I thought about the letter Judd had left me. He'd been right about everything. About Wesley's weaknesses, about Ainsley's manipulation, about the importance of having choices. But most importantly, he'd been right about freedom. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be Wesley again, but the name on the screen made me smile. It was from James, a man I'd met in my pottery class, a widower like me, Someone who understood that starting over at our age wasn't settling for less. It was choosing more. We'd been having dinner together once a week, taking long walks, talking about books and travel and the future. Would you like to have dinner tomorrow night? His message read. I found a new restaurant I think you'd enjoy. I typed back, I'd love to. Eleanor noticed my smile. James? James. Good. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. As Eleanor left and I prepared for bed, I looked around my beautiful home, really looked at it. The art I'd chosen because I loved it, not because it matched someone else's taste. The books I was reading because they interested me, not because someone else thought they were appropriate. The calendar filled with activities I'd chosen, plans I'd made, a life I was actively creating instead of just enduring. This was what Judd had given me. Not just financial security, but the power to choose who I wanted to be and how I wanted to live. 6 months ago, I'd been a sick old woman in a wig, being told by my own family that I needed to accept my limitations and be grateful for whatever care they decided to provide. Now I was Norma Holloway, a woman with resources and options and a future full of possibilities. Wesley and Ainsley would never understand the choice I'd made. To them, I'd always be the mother and mother-in-law who'd become inconvenient, the burden they'd managed to relocate successfully. They had no idea that I was living better than they were, that I had more money than they could imagine, that I'd built a life more fulfilling than anything I'd had when I was trying so hard to earn their approval, and I intended to keep it that way. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I whispered a quiet thank you to Judd. He'd known exactly what gift to leave me. Not just money, but the reminder that I deserved better than settling for whatever scraps of love and respect others were willing to give me. I deserved the life I was finally brave enough to claim. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new choices, new possibilities, and for the first time in years, I was excited to see what came next. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.